Hello everyone, welcome back to the 10 to 1, your high-speed daily update where we're reeling in all things fishing in 10 minutes or less right here in one spot. I am your host Mike Anderson. Today is Tuesday, February 22nd, and as always I'm excited to be back here again with all of you again today. Now, we all know kayak tournament fishing is all the rage right now, and it's a good reason. Kayaks are much cheaper than traditional gas burners, and they allow anglers access to some of the most underfished and remote waters, and they can be rigged with just about any feature a die-hard bass head can imagine. Now, this popularity has resulted in scads of articles written about how to set up the perfect fishing kayak, which kayaks to buy for fishing, and what types of accessories will or won't help you load the yak once you're out on the water doing the actual kayak fishing. Now, what's been missing though is any type of in-depth disclosure on the mechanics of actually fishing out of a kayak. Because the bottom line is, it's different than fishing out of a boat. You're closer to the water, slightly less stable, constantly sitting down and standing up, and at the mercy of the wind and current. All factors that require a little different approach than angling from a boat. Now, to address some of these challenges, the gang over at Carl's Bait and Tackle and the Catch Co. has put together the following guide to kayak fishing, from mastering boat control to casting and reeling mechanics. Now, remember that not all kayaks are created equal. Kayaks have come a long way in design, size, steering, maneuverability, so some of these tips may not apply directly to you and your setup, but for most anglers getting out on the water, starting out in less than a flashy or upgraded rig, these tips can certainly come in handy to be as prepared as possible and to get you in the right mindset. Now, let's start with tip number 1. Learn to cast one-handed. Now, this must be the most difficult adjustment for anglers used to fishing from the bank or a stable deck of a boat. Even the most stable kayaks don't have much room between the sitting surface and the water, making the standard two-handed wind-up cast a dicey proposition. Experienced kayak anglers cast one-handed the majority of the time with either bait casting or spinning tackle, so it's important to gear up accordingly. Instead of the super heavy flipping stick and a 1-ounce jig, maybe opt to fish with a lighter combo and more finesse tactics if you're new to this. Now, tip number 2 is master the one-handed paddle. Just like the one-handed cast, efficient kayak angling requires skill in handling a paddle with one hand. Paddling a kayak is simple with two hands, as the rhythm comes easily to even the least experienced of anglers. But what do you do when you're fighting a fish with one hand and you've got to steer your boat back upstream to get on the other side of a laydown or avoid an overhanging branch? Practice locking the shaft of your paddle along with a forearm, with anchors along your arm, and allows you to use it more like a canoe paddle. Now, tip number 3 is using your feet. This might seem weird, but you'd be surprised how often experienced kayak anglers use their feet in some way while fishing. If your boat is narrow enough, you can easily use them as rudders to steer your drift on rivers, and they work as great anchors when fishing riprap, laydowns, and other shallow areas. Simply stick a foot out and hold onto the log until you're done fishing. Now, feet are also great for redirecting the boat from a stump, log, or other obstacles when your hands are busy fighting a fish. Tip number 4, cast to steer. Baits that offer resistance, like crankbaits, spinnerbaits, and chatterbaits, can actually be used to help steer the boat. If you're fishing a crankbait from a lightweight kayak, you'll quickly realize that the simple resistance of reeling in the bait will actually pull your boat in the direction you're casting. Use this to your advantage and make cast in specific directions to subtly adjust your boat's position. Tip number 5 is utilize eddies for kayak fishing. Now, this may not come into play for a lot of us, but you might think this current is a nightmare to fish in kayaks, but that's actually far from the truth, provided you know how to use it to your advantage. Most kayaks are short and light enough to actually sit in an eddy, preventing the boat from moving downstream and giving you plenty of time to thoroughly fish the corresponding current seam. To maximize this, go to the past spot that you want to fish. Then tuck in the eddy behind it and fish until your heart's content, without even having to paddle. Tip number 6 is don't be afraid to anchor. Although cumbersome for some kayak models, anchors definitely have a place in the kayak fishing arsenal, especially tournament anglers. This is particularly true on lakes where it's windy or in areas offshore where you want to stay in one particular spot. For most kayak models, a 2 to 4 pound anchor is more than sufficient. Be careful anchoring in current though, as if something were to happen, the current can actually push the whole boat underwater. Most river kayakers use a quick release clevis on their anchors if they anchor at all. Now last but not least is number 7, hug the shoreline. When it's windy or when paddling up current, it takes a lot of effort to make any headway, much less fish. In these situations, use the minimal draft of your kayak to your advantage. Instead of paddling right down the middle of the river or lake, get as shallow as you can. The current is much less in super skinny water, and wind and waves are also mitigated by shoreline vegetation and structures. You'll paddle more efficiently, and you're going to have much more energy once you get to your honey hole. Now, I hope this helps, folks. This has been your tips for today on the 10 to 1 update. As always, love seeing you guys here. Stay safe out there, everybody. Tight lines.